Hello, everybody. I just wanted to make a short video here talking about something for some upcoming classes. In the fall semester coming up in a couple weeks, I'm going to be teaching the Python course and the Java course the first term. Uh, those are two that I regularly teach, software development courses. And in both of them, we use modern frameworks. We'll be using modern frameworks, have been for over a year now, year and a half, I guess. In the Python course, we'll be using Django. And instead of using a traditional GUI package, we'll be making a web application in Django. And in the Java class, we'll do a similar thing. This fall, we'll be using uh, Spring Boot to make a web application. Last time I taught the course, or last couple times I taught the course, we just put our web application directly in the JSP pages. But we'll be using Spring Boot this time, modern frameworks, and sort of the modern way to develop software. We don't make desktop applications and then make a different web application and then make a different mobile application. We do hybrid apps these days. So we use frameworks to create one application, usually a web application to start with, and then if we want a desktop application, we just launch that web app on a desktop, not in a browser. Um, it's a browser in the background, but it's a special kind of browser that we remove the address bar for, so we can't go to any other web pages. And same thing for mobile. And then we only write it once. So we'll be seeing that in both classes. And because those classes are specifically for Python or for Java, we won't get to that last step where we like launch our web application in a way that appears as a desktop app. So I wanted to make a video for that for students who have had me in previous classes. If you still check out my YouTube videos, or for students this semester, if you're watching uh, I'll point you towards this video. That's why I was making it. So in class, like in the Python course, we will make Django application. We will also make a Flask application. Either one of those would work. They're both web applications, and then we can just launch them here. And in the Java course, we'll be making a Spring Boot application, and we'll launch it as a desktop application. So for the purposes of this video, I went ahead and made a web application. I just did HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And actually, the CSS is blank. I did not do any CSS. I guess I just created that out of habit. Uh, Almost forgot it was even there. HTML and JavaScript. And if you've had me in a class recently, within the last year and a half, you probably recognize our standard in-class example for web application. In the Python course, we do this with Django. And in the Java course, we do this with JSP pages. And for those in the class coming up this fall, we'll use Spring Boot. So it's a tip calculator. I found that works really good in America. Um, People understand tip calculators and payroll calculators. So those are my good examples. In the Spring Boot one this fall, we'll also do an API that spits out local restaurants. So we'll just kind of combine both examples there. But uh, some way or another, we'll have a web application. This one's with JavaScript, but if you made one with Django or made one with Spring Boot, so in Python with the Django framework, or in the Spring Boot framework for Java, either way, or just HTML and CSS, either way it goes, we end up with a web application. And once we have a web application, so our examples, enter a meal price, set the slider for how good the surface was, and calculate the tip. Okay, so this all works. Give it a couple checks. Right? A cheaper restaurant with really lousy service, and yeah, everything appears to be working. So, however, we end up with a web application. Once we have a web application, it works in a browser, but we want it to look like a desktop application. So we need to launch it in a special kind of browser. Basically one that only has the browser window and takes away the address bar and the tabs so that we can't go to another page. And well, if I open this back up, so if we took everything below this little line right here, or we want to get rid of everything above this line right here so that we can't tell we're running a web application. And then we do the same thing for mobile, uh, and just have different size issues going on, which CSS can easily handle that for us. So we need a way to launch this. And one of the most popular ways is to use the Electron framework. So let's look at that. In order to use that, we will need something else installed. So make sure you have Node.js installed. If you don't have it installed, um, just use whatever your preferred search engine is. Look for Node.js, and it should be right at the top of the results. And right at the top of their homepage is the download button. Just download whatever the latest long-term support version is. Or you can download a newer version if you want to be a beta tester. But I'm going to recommend downloading the long-term support if you're just getting started in Node.js and things like Electron Framework. So now we can use Node.js to set up the Electron Framework for this web application. So I'm going to open PowerShell. That's the terminal I usually use. I can probably zoom in a little. So Node.js, to get to that, it's either going to be npm or npx. I'm just going to be using npm in this video. If we do npm init, it's going to ask us some questions. First off, what's our package going to be called? Sure, tipping sounds like a good name. Version 1. We could skip all this and type it in. You'll see here in just a second. Description, a video example launching a web in the Electron framework. Desktop. Entry point. So it scanned the folder and noticed there was a JavaScript file there that does not have the stuff for the Electron framework. If you ran init on an empty folder, it would recommend doing index.js, so I'll call it that, but you can call it whatever you want to. Test command, I'm going to skip this for now. Git repository, I'm going to skip this, but I will have a note about something important for Git here in a moment. Keywords, I'm going to skip that. For the author, Chris Francis 555, that's a username I often use. 555 is a reference to a 555 timer, one of the most useful integrated circuits ever created. Oh, and then one of the license. It's going to default to, I don't know, I always want to type MIT or Apache. Those are the two I use most often. And you'll notice it just created some JavaScript, or not JavaScript, sorry. It created some JSON for us, some JSON data. With that stuff we entered, we will need to add something to scripts. We could have just created the JSON file and put all this in it, but it's a little easier when the computer writes it. Sure, that's fine. And if we look back over at the folder, so we'll jump back over to File Explorer, and see how it created this package.json file. But we still need a couple more things. We need the Electron framework installed. So I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Tab, go back over to PowerShell, and in PowerShell I'll use Node.js again. So npm install Electron. And this should just take a couple seconds. And npm is Node.js, so this is the same in a Linux bash or a Mac Zsh or whatever terminal you're using. In all these commands we've used came from npm. So now if I Control-Alt-Tab and go back over to the File Explorer, we also got this node modules. So for this video, I skipped the Git stuff, but you're probably going to track your version, do some version control, and most likely be using Git for that, like every other programmer in the world. I recently looked up the statistics. So Git is the most popular version control system with 99.1%. And then second and third place, well, if Git has over 99%, there's not much space. So there's not much usage on the other ones, but you're probably going to be using Git. Make sure you put node modules into your git ignore file. You'll notice it's 236 megabytes of text files. So definitely put that in your git ignore. Otherwise, we're ready to create our stuff. So I'll open it with, I use Sublime, but whatever your preferred text editor is, open that up. Here's package.json. One thing we will need is we'll need to add the script to start it. I'll come back and do that. So I'm going to open that. Here's the HTML for that, just a quick form, and then the JavaScript. The button just calls this one tip that grabs the values from those inputs, does the tip calculation, and spits out a sentence. Nothing too fancy in this app, but however you get your web app, they'll all be about the same. So I need to create. I forgot the name that quick. Did I call it index? Oh, actually, I can see it in package, can I? In package JSON. Oh, yes. So we're going to launch from index.js. So we need to create that. Index.js. And here's where we'll do the stuff to launch. Basically, it's just a short amount that we need to launch our web application in the local window. And for those who have had me in class, this video is kind of intended for my students because both classes I'm teaching soon and most of the software development courses I've taught recently, we looked at making web applications with frameworks, but we never took that last step into hybrid apps because hybrid apps is an independent class at the college where I teach at. So that's another class. We never took that last step, but I have a feeling people want to go ahead and take this or want to go ahead and see this and might not be taking that hybrid apps because that's an elective. So we need a couple things. So I'm going to create some constants because they're not going to change. Basically, everything in this file is going to be a constant. In JavaScript, we have 3 keywords. Var gives us block scope. So in between 2 curly braces. So if it's outside of everything, it gives us global scope. Let gives us, var gives us function scope. So inside the function it's in. Let gives us block scope. And constant gives us block scope as well. So you probably want to use let and constant to declare your variables. This one's not going to change, so we want to make them constants. I'm going to go ahead and make 2 in one line. So app and browser window. I'll call them the same thing that the Electron framework does. Require those from Electron. So that's what our syntax looks like. And then end of instruction because it's JavaScript. So require the Electron framework, and we want the browser window object and the app object or classes. We'll turn them into objects soon. We need a couple more. I'll go ahead and write them here. We'll also need a URL, and that one's really easy to remember. That's require URL. So we'll import the URL package and pull the URL class from it. And same thing with path. So path, and we'll require the path package. Those two are easy. App and browser window, we could have done that in 2 separate lines. App equals require electron, browser window equals require electron. Just kind of consolidating it here. And now we can create our main function. Function, I couldn't think of anything quickly, so I'm just going to use the words I just said. Main function. You can probably come up with a better name than main function for it, though. And again, everything here is none of it's going to change, so we can just keep it as constants instead of variables. I'll call it launch window. That's sort of descriptive of what it is, but that's just the variable name. You can call that whatever you want. What matters is that it is a new browser window. A semicolon at the end, but we need some parameters. And in particular, the parameters go in as key value pairs, but it's not JSON. So it goes in curly braces like JSON, and we have key value pairs, but our keys look like variables. So no quote marks on the keys. Title is going to be tipping, and that's the title that shows at the top of our window. Then we need a size for it. Width variable. I guess, yeah, key, however we want to refer to that, 876, and a height. If you didn't already guess, the height was the other one we needed to go with width. So the title that shows on our window, the width of it, and the height of it, or I said on the window. On a Windows or Linux, it's on the window. If you're on a Mac, it's up there at the top in that top bar. This will be native to all of our stuff, so the window will look correctly for whatever system you run it on. And now we just need to tell it what to open, which where's index.js? Oh, I haven't saved it yet. Let me save that so it shows up in the folder. So here's index.js. So this is the one that's going to launch the Electron container to display our web application in the same folder. So we don't need anything fancy in the URL here, but if you're following along in this video, you probably know how to add a little bit more to the file names. So I'm just going to create a new constant. I'll call it home URL because, again, I'm not feeling very creative right now. And this is where we need those other ones, the URL and the path. So we want to do URL.format, put it in the proper format for the Electron framework. We can use underscore dir name, so that's sometimes called dub, for short for double underscore. So dub dir name, and then the name of our app, which the HTML page is what launches that. So tipapp.html. I put that in the wrong spot. That's not where that goes in. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. We have to do the same thing we did here. So the new browser window gets these Electron framework, really it's Node.js formatted key value pairs. We need those. And here's the one I was trying to, I jumped ahead and started making. We need the path name, and that's going to be path.join. Sorry, jumped ahead of myself. Dub underscore, or dub dir name. Dub is how we sometimes say double underscore. I should just say it that way. Underscore dir name gives us the directory we're currently in. And then we're going to launch tipapp.html. Since this is going to classes with other things, I'll go ahead and we might want to specify what type of protocol we're opening with it. If I can spell protocol correctly, we'll use a file protocol when we open it. There's nothing too fancy there. Then our launch window, the thing we created up here. So launch window is a nice object now, so we can call one of the methods in it. In particular, we have a load URL method that we can just use to call this home URL we just created. End of instruction. Oh, and if you're splitting it up across multiple lines like I did here, remember that is just one line, so don't forget your semicolon. Same thing up here. It is just one line, so remember your semicolon after the parentheses. And that's all we need to launch it. So now all that remains is the instruction to launch it. So app, that other thing we imported from the Electron framework, it has a bunch of stuff in it. In particular, it has this when ready method, which is fairly self-explanatory. Whenever everything is ready, we can call a .then method, and what we want to do is run our main function. And notice that is after end of the main function. I'll label that end main function. Label that closing curly brace. So after our main function, then back out at global level. So basically that runs before the function, but I just wrote it afterwards because that's where the cursor was. We're going to call this main function, which will create a new browser window. and load in the path to our uh, web application. Which, yeah, in the Java and Python courses, the students this video is kind of being made for, you will have web applications made in either the Django framework for Python or the Spring Boot framework for Java. Either way, you'll have a web application. So now we're ready to launch it, but we need to tell Node.js how to launch it. And that's what goes, so if we come over to package.json. In scripts, we need to create a new one. So I'm going to add a comma for a new one. And then we need to give it some sort of name. I'll just call it tip app. Well, it's JSON. We give it a key value pair, so we're making up the key and the value. So make up whatever key you want to call to start this. And then what we want to do is start the electron framework and then dot for the current directory. Electron framework in our current directory. So I'll save that. And now if I jump back over to PowerShell, all of that stuff's ready. So if we say npm run tip app, that key we just put in the scripts, we get our little desktop application. You can see I'm running on a Windows machine. It looks like a Windows thing. Still works just like it did before. Enter a meal price, move the slider to determine the service, and it tells us what the tip is. Or 123.45 with really great service. We should probably tip this much. So you can see it's fairly straightforward. And when you're done, just close the window. And so I guess the shortcut, next step, you would probably create a batch file that just runs this command and then make a shortcut to that batch file and change the icon on it. And that's what the end user would double click on to start that. But you can see once we get that set up, it's just this instruction right here, which we would give the user something to double click on, that then runs this instruction in the background and hides our window or hides our terminal, and then that launches the app. So there's the step after what we will cover in class. Because in both of those classes, again, we're just going to cover the Python or the Java part. So we'll just see that we'll just get as far as a web application. But once we have a web application, we can use the Electron framework to launch it and make it look like a traditional desktop application. That easily. Been doing that in the software development classes for the last year and a half, and we never quite did the last step because hybrid apps, actually using things like the Electron framework, is an elective afterwards, or was supposed to be, but then it seems to be an elective that never runs. So students aren't seeing that last step. So I thought I'd make a short video to show what to do afterwards. Use Node.js to initialize a project, and then Node.js to install Electron. Make sure you ignore node modules in your git ignore file if you're going to a repository. And then create your launcher file, which is just something that basically looks exactly like this every time. So this is the bare minimum. Obviously, there's a lot more parameters and fine details we can work in there. But for the bare minimum, it's going to look exactly like this every time. So once you create it once, you can copy and paste that and use that in all your future apps. And then just give the user something to double click on that runs this instruction in the background, and they'll think they have a desktop application. Just wanted to make that video because it doesn't seem to get covered in the Python or Java software development class. And we will definitely be making web applications in both of those classes using either the Django framework for Python or the Spring Boot framework for Java. So hopefully you'll find that useful. Take the stuff from class one step further because we won't be doing this in either of those classes. All right, thanks.